I've had the opportunity to do quite a lot of travel this summer, and it's always interesting to visit other churches and observe their services. We're pretty similar. I find that there are a lot of other wonderful discussions before and after the service, just as we have in our church, and it's always a joy to hear other people's point of view. One of the things that has become drawn to my attention lately, and I think this is by spirit more than some of the conversations, was what people go through for religious freedom. Now, we hear and probably have heard most of our lives about the Christians being fed to the lions, and that sounds pretty hideous. And I have to say, I'm pretty glad we don't live in those days. But having just returned from New England, where they're still extremely aware of women with special abilities, special gifts of the Spirit, were called witches and drowned or burned at the stake. Now, we know in the early days of spiritualism, the pioneers put their careers and their names on the line. They set out to explore this phenomena that was growing like wildfire across the country. This phenomena begun by the two little Fox sisters. And we must not forget the peddler, Charles B. Rosman. Well, this was a very growing activity, and people were talking about it everywhere you went. And so judges, professors, journalists, authors, all set about examining this. They wanted to see for themselves what all the commotion was about. And many of them had every intention of proving that this was fraudulent. This was something to excite people, but in reality it was not true. And one by one, as they investigated and explored and pried, one by one, they became convinced of the truth of this new understanding. Now, the mediums in those days may not have been burned at the stake or drowned, but other pretty dreadful things were done to them. They were tied up. They were put in canvas bags, and the bag drawn and tied with a rope, and then wax seal put over the knot of the rope. And then they were expected to produce phenomena. And they did. And they did. Young women in Victorian times now, when they were buttoned up to here and shoes buttoned and skirts down to the ground, young women were personally invaded and checked and examined. I dare say just as thoroughly as some prisoners of war are today. Because they were so certain there had to be something somewhere that was producing phenomena. For the sake of the truth of this religion, these young women tolerated the humiliation. They were known to be nailed by their clothing and their beautiful, luxurious hair, nailed to the floor to be sure that they were not producing phenomena. And still they did. We don't have a clue what it was like in those days, because fortunately no one here has had to endure that sort of punishment. And yet they did keep going. They kept doing Spirit's work because they knew that this indeed is the light of the world, that this indeed is a religion, it is a science, and it is a philosophy, and it could change the world if people only knew. Even today, there are so many countries where people cannot worship. If they want to, they have to hide in attics and cellars to worship their own God. And here we are as spiritualists, thanks to the pioneers, able to have beautiful churches that the members provided, on beautiful grounds that the members provided, with beautiful music that members provide. And we're not afraid to sing out. We want to raise the rafters. We want them to know we're here. We are so blessed in so many ways. And one of the ways we're blessed is that wonderful spirit communication. You know, while I was away, I heard remarkable stories about people who have come from terrible, terrible childhoods, who married to get out of the home and literally went from the frying pan to the fire, with abusive spouses, alcoholism, drug abuse, no food to feed children. You better believe they prayed a lot, and they talked to Spirit a lot. And the one thing that turned everyone around was the encouragement from Spirit. Those little nudges that said, look into this, investigate that. Now, the one thing all of these people accomplished was remarkable. One man, 19 years old, and his 16-year-old bride, they could do that in those days, built their own log cabin. Well, nowadays you can buy kits to do that, and it's still a lot of work to put it together, but this young couple had to go out and cut trees from the property that his parents had provided for them. They had to split those trees. They did this by hand. They didn't have power tools. They had little saws. They had a hammer. I don't think they had a crowbar. They mixed all the cement for the grout to put between the logs by hand, and that meant carrying water from the stream to mix it. And they started out with 2 rooms, and they were happy. They built it themselves. They knew they could expand as children came, and they did expand. And this wonderful gentleman is an ordained minister in the religion of spiritualism. He's 88 now. Went through the Depression. Never once felt pity for himself. Never once sat back and waited for the government to provide. Never expected other people to help. Other people were busy scrambling for their own lives. This man loves animals. He's always had multitudes of cats and dogs and horses and any other critter that wandered by that needed food, reminding us of some other people in our church. Another woman also came from a very poor family, very abusive. She married to get out of the home as well, and quickly the children came.